This is Jackanory. Hello, I'm Martin. This is the story of my trip to the North Pole to find the last polar bears. All my life I've wanted to see how polar bears really live, to see them swimming amongst the icebergs and playing in the snow. You see, I remember going to the zoo one hot summer's afternoon and seeing my first polar bear. He was sitting in the shade of a dead tree. It was a small concrete pool for him to swim in. The water was green. I looked at the polar bear. There was no snow for him to roll in, no icebergs for him to float upon. There was no life for a polar bear. I couldn't save him. How could I? You can hardly smuggle a polar bear under your coat and walk out with him, can you? Well, that day I decided I'd go to the North Pole and see how the polar bears really live. I went to the library and I read everything I could find about polar bears, where they live, what they eat, and how to look for them in remote places. I studied many maps until one day, in the British Museum, I found the map of Great Bear Ridge. I knew then that that is where I would find the last polar bears. I began to plan an expedition. I decided after a lot of thought to take Rue with me and a golf trolley as a sledge. Huskies would be better, but I couldn't afford to feed them. Rue said that her particular breed was in fact better than huskies on the snow, but that no one had ever given them the chance to prove it. When I told her that our expedition was to the North Pole, she said that she'd heard of it and she thought that one of her relations had helped to put it up. I loaded the golf trolley with everything we'd need for our journey, and we crept out of the house and set sail for the North Pole on a ship called the Unsinkable. Our cabin had 2 portholes, one for Rue and one for me. I saw a lot of seagulls and a porpoise, and Rue said she saw a sheep. Rue's not a very good sailor. She says that dogs aren't supposed to be on boats. I told her that some boats always have a cat on board to kill rats. Rue said anything a cat can do, a dog can do better, and the dogs are famous for being great sailors. She said that her grandfather was probably the captain of a ship and that he probably killed hundreds of rats. He probably did, I said. Rue asked the captain if she could have a go at steering the ship. For half an hour we went round in circles. Rue said dogs always steer ships in this way. The captain was worried about the ship hitting a rock, so he took over and we continued in a straight line toward the North Pole. It was a long way to the North Pole. We sailed through storms and high seas, and it grew colder and colder. Rue wore my socks to keep her paws warm. Every day she asked if we were there yet. Every day I had to tell her, not yet, but soon, very soon. It's a long way to the North Pole, and I needed to keep her spirits up. The sea is such a big place. Seems to go on forever. We did see some land yesterday. The captain pointed out the islands of Shetland, but he didn't stop, as he said we had to make good time if we wanted to reach the North Pole before the bad weather. Of course, I never mentioned anything about the bad weather to Rue, as I thought it might upset her. She'd been rather a nuisance, I'm afraid, and I began to wonder whether it was such a good idea to bring her along in the first place. I thought she might be useful, pulling a trolley up the steep bits. Perhaps I should have brought a husky after all. Rue announced that she'd changed her mind about finding the last polar bears and that she'd decided to go home. She said that she'd been mistaken, and it wasn't snow that her particular breed were good on, it was sand. I said it was impossible to go back now, and that we just had to press on. Rue said that dogs were excellent swimmers, and that she could swim back if she wanted to. I had to put her lead on and tie her to the mast, as I was frightened that she just might try it. She howled all afternoon until I untied her. One night, Rue insisted on sleeping in a hammock. I didn't think this was a very good idea, but she said that her grandfather had probably slept in one all the time he was at sea. I finally agreed, but I warned her not to stand up in the hammock. She ignored me completely and promptly fell out onto the floor. I wish she'd sleep in her basket like a normal dog. Later that night, the ship took a real pounding from a dreadful storm. The engine stopped completely, and when the captain tried to get it going again, nothing happened. Until Roo helped. At last we landed at a place called Walrus Bay. Hurrah! The captain wished me luck, and he gave Roo a tin of macaroni cheese. I think he really liked her. It was sad to see him go. We were welcomed into Walrus by hundreds of penguins. But no polar bears! Our cabin stood on a hill just outside Walrus. It was very dirty inside, and it seemed quite gloomy, but we soon cleaned it up. It wasn't much, but it was home. Our first night at the North Pole was very cold. Roo wouldn't sleep in her basket and got into my bed. Her paws stuck into me, and she fidgeted about so much that I hardly slept a wink. And to make matters worse, a wolf sat on our roof and howled all night. The next day, I wanted to begin our search for the polar bears, but the snow kept on falling. It snowed so much that it nearly buried our cabin. For 3 days we were cooped up, and our fuel ran low. I had to burn the chairs and Roo's basket to keep us warm. Roo was very upset about her basket. She said that she wanted to keep things in it. I said it was a pity she hadn't slept in it. Sometimes I wished I had brought a husky. I tried to sleep, but was woken by more wolves running across the roof. Roo said that she was tired of looking for polar bears and wanted to go home. At last, it stopped snowing, and I took Roo out to a place called the Gentle Slopes. There she could practice pulling the golf trolley through the snow. However, halfway up the slope, Roo decided she wanted to go down and took off, dragging my golf trolley behind her.